We are back with former Secretary of Agriculture John Block. This will be our last session. It's still the 10th of July. Good morning, Mr. Secretary.
Good morning. It's once again a delight to be here.
Yeah, it's fascinating to talk to somebody who's lived the life that you have and been involved in agriculture all these years. When we last broke off, we were talking about your own family's hog production. And we got into some areas now that has very much been in the news for the last few years. And I prompted you last time that we would start with a discussion about waste, if you will, from the hog, a major facility like your son is now operating in terms of how you deal with the waste products.
Well, first of all, our sow herd, they run in the field, so we don't have to deal with it there. But the finishing hogs in particular are in the barns, and there's always the honey, the waste, to haul away or do something with it. And we put it in a honey wagon and we knife it into the fields. And the reality is it probably saves us, we're probably worth $100,000 a year, just the fertilizer value of the waste. So it's a fairly valuable commodity, especially as expensive as fertilizer was last year, but fertilizer prices are down some now. So I never considered it to be a problem. It's a problem of you got to haul it out and take it out to the field and knife it in, and you got to be sure you've got a field where you can put it. And we usually plant some wheat. We do every year plant some wheat. Wheat's not something we would necessarily grow as much of, but you can harvest that in July, which opens up these fields to take the honey out and get rid of the waste. So that's what we do. But the whole industries, they're still plagued with this problem. One of the problems is they have a lot of big, huge hog farms, bigger than ours in some states, and they don't have the farmland to put the waste on where it can be used. I mean, it's valuable to us.
You recognize the phrase NIMBY? Not in my backyard.
Well, that's true with lots of things. Besides, there's some people don't want a hog farm in their backyard, and they've had fights over that. And some people don't want windmills in their backyard either. So
that has not been an issue where your son's farming now.
No, we're 10 miles from town. We're really out in the country, and there's not going to be, well, I can't say not going to be, but it's not likely there'll be a problem there. And I think everyone realizes when we haul manure out and put it into the fields that, it's a one-time thing, but we need to do it because you got to use that.
Okay. And I guess we're talking about that, just the whole concept of factory farms. And a lot of people now are objecting to these factory farms, making the statement that we're treating these animals in inhumane ways. How would you react to that criticism?
Well, I think that's coming from a lot of people that don't know farming and they don't know agriculture. I mean, you cannot treat your pigs, for instance, or calves in an inhumane way and treat them badly and expect them to grow and produce and make any money for you. Because if anything that's treated badly is not going to be an efficient producer. So, I mean, the economics, if nothing else, tells us that you got to treat the animals right. And I think we do. I know there's examples where they weren't, but even when I was state director of agriculture in Illinois, we had people that were not taking care of their horses, and they were starving them for different reasons. Maybe they had no money to feed them. So there are occasions where somebody is mistreating animals, but for the most part, commercial farmers or factory farms, what do you want to call them, man, they are intent on doing things well in order to try to make a living. So I've got very little sympathy for those that are criticizing so-called factory farms. I mean, I don't know what that exactly means. Do they think my farm's a factory farm? I don't know what it is, but it is a commercial farm, and we're in a business to produce food and sell it to make a living. But also by doing so, we're providing food for a lot of hungry people. And anybody that thinks that you can go back to a one-donkey farm, I mean, with a few chickens scratching in the backyard and pigs rooting out back, and milking a cow by hand, as we did when I was a kid, if they think that's the way to feed 11 billion people, which we're going to have on the planet here in the next few years, well, they're just absolutely wrong. You can't do it.
Mm-hmm. Well, much of what we're going to be talking about from here on out is exactly this kind of stuff. It's how agriculture is being discussed in the last few years in today's society, in today's economy, in a very fast-paced, changing world that we live in. Same kind of discussion here. No, I just kind of lost my train of thought. Let me go back and take it up in this way here.
What? Okay.
A little bit change of a direction, but 1998, hog prices collapsed. And this has been a cyclical thing, but that was an especially tough year in the hog market.
Well, hog prices collapsed in 2008 in this last year, and they were down a lot. They've been down for a year and a half. It's very hard. You know, I always said that when prices are high, the hog barns they smell just fine. When you got bad prices, they kind of stink, and you can't help it. But that's the reality. But it's a cyclical business. It goes up and down and up and down, and that's just the way it is.
But those ups and downs always result in a lot of the producers going out of the business entirely.
Well, that's right. And if you look back over history, the number of commercial farms declines. It's been declining all the time. But it's not just in the United States. It's in virtually every developed country in the world. Commercial farms there are less of them. But they produce more, but they're less farms. And I have said all the time, really, why is this happening? They say, how can we lose farms? It's because we have new technology to farm with. When you had to go out and hoe the weeds out of the crop, whatever it was, it takes so much labor that you had to have small farms. You couldn't hoe the weeds out of 4,000 acres. There aren't enough hoes or enough people to handle the hoes. But 4,000 acres, you can control the weeds with genetically engineered seeds, and just spray the Roundup on top, and the weeds are gone, and the crop is growing. You know, this thing is ringing again, and I'm going to shut it off.
There's a piece of modern technology that we can do without for about a half an hour, Mr. Secretary.
You know, I had this thing, I had it on when I made my phone call, and I didn't get it shut off. But the technology today is so important, and these critics of commercial farms and factory farms, they call them, they are wrong. If we don't use all the new technology, we're not going to be able to feed the world. There's more people in the world every year and every day, and we need to have a means of raising our crops without as many people doing it. And if you go back to these little farms that they're talking about, all these people are going to be back farming a little farm, and then they're not going to be able to do all the other kinds of things we need to do in our economy. Our economy's got a lot of people employed in other ways. They're not in farming. What, you got 300,000 commercial farms today, or 200,000? I don't know. It's not very many. And in the United States and countries all over the world, there are less people on the farms all the time because we have new great machines that'll plant more, bigger fields. We have chemicals to control the weeds, and we have genetic engineering to get higher yields. We have fertilizer, and we apply the fertilizer in a precision way because we use satellites to tell us how much to put here and how much to put there. And it's becoming a very precise business, and it's changed a lot.
Mm-hmm. Well, you've touched on a lot of things there. What's your personal view then about the future of the family farm? Now, there's a phrase that has a lot of emotion attached to it.
It does, and it's. I think different people see it different ways. And if you would read the big city newspapers, you would think that all the farms in the country, or most of the farming, was done by big corporations, which it isn't. More than 90% of our farms today are family farms. It's just that they've gotten bigger, and I think family farms are going to be around for a long time, and they will have to be big enough to be efficient. They can't be tiny. The tiny ones aren't efficient enough to feed the family, unless you're just going to eat out of your own garden, and then you won't have anything during the off season. Guess you could butcher a hog, probably.
Here's another one of the things that we've heard increasingly a lot about, in an age where right now the President of the United States is meeting other world leaders in Italy, and yesterday's discussion was about greenhouse gases and global warming. And some of that discussion ends up being a discussion about animals and greenhouse gases that animals produce. Your reaction to that debate?
Well, yeah, they're going to get rid of the cows because they're creating too much greenhouse gas.
Well, what's another way of saying that? More.
Yeah, I think they fart too much. The cows do. But you know, this is all. First of all, I'm not sure that I buy into this, the fact that the CO2 and the methane in the air is changing the atmosphere, and it ensures that we're going to have global warming. We might have global warming. We might have global cooling, too, because history shows that we've had global cooling in the past and global warming, and we didn't have a lot of big cars and trucks and industrial equipment creating a lot of CO2 and methane and whatever else. So there's a segment of people that are addressing this whole problem, and I don't know. I'm just not sold on it yet. But I've got an open mind. I just don't want to see them put the hammer on agriculture and rural America when they pass cap and trade legislation. I think there's better ways to deal with it than cap and trade, and I don't want to explain it because nobody understands it anyway.
Yeah.
But
well, cap and trade is very much in the headlines, though, right now.
I know
it's
it
passed
sure
the House.
You know, it's effectively a big tax, and I don't know. We'll see what happens on that. That's just in the news, and we don't know what we're going to do on it. But I even worry about. You're talking about people that are after the methane gas that cows emit, and hogs too, and animals. But there's a fair number of people that are attacking animal agriculture. A lot of them are vegetarians, and I think get more attention than they deserve, because the people at large in the country are not vegetarians, and they're going to eat a steak, and they're going to eat their pork chop and chicken and whatever there is. But they're getting a lot of attention, and they're trying to tell us how to run our farms and try to manage this and how to manage that. And then they get after if they can find any little reason to criticize animal agriculture, they will. And that's part of this methane gas deal.
Well, another part of the whole debate in the last couple of years, I think it was probably about a year ago, that gas prices in the United States went in the neighborhood of $4, $4.25 per gallon.
Yeah.
Now it's in the neighborhood of about $2.60. A few months before, it was down to about $1.75 and $1.80. So it's been all over the place. But part of that whole dialogue about the oil crisis and importing so much foreign oil and how do you replace that has evolved around ethanol production as well. And as a farmer who's, I'm sure, tens of thousands of bushels of grain that your farm is producing every year, if not more than that. Can you discuss that a little bit for us?
Well, even today, I think a fair amount of our grain is going into ethanol,
which is helping with prices.
Well, it strengthens the price of corn. But the other thing, and from a farmer's point of view, we like that. It's a market. It's just like trying to find an export market. We found another market, and it's ethanol. And my story on ethanol to start with was when I was at the Illinois State Fair, and I was state director of agriculture way back in the 70s. And this plane is flying over, and it has a big flag on the back of it. It's flying low. It's just a one-engine plane over the fairgrounds, and it says fueled by corn alcohol, fueled with corn alcohol or something like that. Didn't say ethanol. And then I was talking to representatives at an event we had from ADM, and it was an ADM plane promoting ethanol way back then. And ADM is the biggest ethanol producer in the world, frankly. And they were promoting it that in the 70s. And over all these years, ethanol was just kind of hanging in there, doing a certain amount of business, but not really growing. But then when we get high oil prices and when we get concerned about energy security, then there's a lot more support for alternative energy, and ethanol is the main one. We think that it might be wind or it might be solar, but wind and solar are providing less than 1% of our energy, whereas ethanol is up in the 10% range. I mean, we're doing quite a bit with ethanol right now, and ethanol has helped to keep the price of fuel down, especially last year when it was so expensive anyway.
There has been criticism, though, about ethanol because one of the criticism is it's not terribly efficient. You got to put a lot of fuel in to the production cycle to get a little bit more out.
Well, I think that all of this conversion of fuel and so forth does cost something, but we've got a lot better technology, and some of the criticism is based on old numbers. And today, with the improved technology, I think anyone would have to say that ethanol is fairly efficient and is certainly a cleaner burning fuel than petroleum. But I'm not against petroleum either. I'm for anything and everything that we can find to reduce our reliance on foreign oil from countries that are maybe not very friendly, and Venezuela and even in the Middle East sometimes. Let's try to find new sources of our own energy if we can.
Mm-hmm. Yet another criticism in ethanol production right now is that it's pretty heavily subsidized. And of course, you're coming from a frame of reference here of Reagan and trying to get government out of that business a little bit more. Your thoughts on that?
Well, I think if indeed we're serious about reducing our reliance on foreign oil, then I think you're going to have to subsidize some of these alternatives to give them a leg up and get them going as we go to the future. And anybody that would suggest that we don't subsidize oil, they're missing the boat. Because of all the military that we've had around the world to protect our interest in oil, I mean, we've done that. In fact, even during former President Bush, Bush 1's tenure, Iraq invaded some countries, including Saudi Arabia, taking over land, and we went in there and knocked them out and ran them back home with a tail between their legs. And you think we did it because we really love Saudi Arabia or Kuwait or anything? No, we were protecting oil. And so we've spent a lot of money. So anybody who starts telling me about subsidies for ethanol, I'm quick to remind them about the subsidies for oil too. Energy is so important. We just have to have it, and we need to protect it or produce it somehow.
Well, very much at the heart of this discussion we've been having right here is what happened a year ago or the last couple years in terms of commodity prices. It starts with the commodity price for oil going from, I don't know, $60, $70 a barrel up to about $145, down to $50 again, and wherever we're at now. But I know that commodity prices for grain, for cattle, for everything has really fluctuated over the last year and a half. Can you talk about the impact of that?
Well, I think it's very difficult for farmers. You know, for the livestock people had a hard time because the cost of their feed went up. It was very hard on them. The grain people were enjoying a good price for their grain.
A frame of reference, if you can, Mr. Secretary, of where corn had historically been for the last 2 or 3 decades and where it got at the peak.
Well, I mentioned that when Earl Butz in the 70s sold grain to Russia, corn prices effectively jumped from $1 a bushel to $2. And then when we had ethanol and the high energy prices this last summer, corn went up to $6 or whatever it went up to, but effectively, even now it's dropped down to about 3 or maybe 3 1/4, depending. But we've taken another jump. Is it a new plateau? Are we going back to $2? I don't think so. I think we're on a new plateau. We don't know where it'll be, and it'll keep fluctuating up and down. But that's fine. That's the way markets work.
Is that all about supply and demand from your perspective, or is there a lot of speculation in commodity markets like we've heard here lately?
Well, there probably was quite a bit last year, and maybe there is now. But there's always been speculation in commodity markets. I mean, I remember when, I don't remember who it was, tried to corner the soybean market. I mean, there's always been speculation in commodity markets. There's speculation in stocks. If everybody thinks the stock is going up, they're going to buy it. And it goes up, and then it comes down. And I think that's kind of what's happened with commodities. I think if you're going to have a real market, markets are the function of what they think the value of something is. And is it going up or is it not?
Mm-hmm. Well, everything you just talked about now suggests that farmers are the ultimate gamblers. They're gambling on whether it's going to rain. They're gambling if they're going to be hit with some kind of a pest that they don't know about. And now they got to gamble with the market day in and day out as well. How difficult is it for a farmer to know how to market his crop?
Well, they do gamble with the market, but I don't want to suggest that this is the only time. We had $5 corn in 1996 for a period of time. We've had these spikes, and we've had it go down real low. So we always deal with this erratic market. Now, maybe you could say it's worse than ever. Maybe it is. It could be, because certainly last year it went way high, and now it's down quite a bit from, it's half what it was or something like that. So you got to wonder where we're going from here. Are we going down? Are we going up? But if you live in a global market, which we do, I mean, it's just, and we're not the only ones living in this. The oil industry lives with these ups and downs, the copper, the steel, all of these commodities, depending on what the situation is, live with erratic markets. And it's so hard to know how to hedge your bets, protect yourself against erratic swings. There's a lot of even ethanol plants last year. Ethanol plants, they booked corn last summer, and they were buying it for a high price, maybe $6 a bushel. And the price went to 3 or 4, and it killed them. Some of them went broke. We had hog operations that bought a lot of corn at high prices, and then the price went down, and then hogs were down, and they lost their tail. So we all live with this. It's very hard. You have to, as just an individual farmer, we don't market our hogs in advance. We market them week by week. We don't think we can outguess the market. Mm-hmm. On corn, we do try to find prices that are, in our judgment, profitable for us, and we'll try to sell some of them and book corn at good prices. But you never know. You might have a whole year where the price is not good. So what are you going to do? You're going to sell it at a bad price.
As a lifelong farmer and as a former Secretary of Agriculture, how much government involvement would you like to see in moderating those extremes?
I don't think the government should try to set prices. I think they have to just let the markets work. I would say that if there's some of this speculation, maybe if they can corral a little bit of it, and I'm not here to say how to do it, maybe they can do that. But you've got to have a market that works with people bidding and betting on the future. That's what markets are. So it's not easy, but I'll tell you, I've lived with it all my farming years, and we've done well. And we've ridden this roller coaster up and down, and we've hung on. And we've prospered on balance. We've had bad times sometimes, but on balance, we've prospered. And I think that's what you have to do.
Another phrase you hear is ripped right out of the headlines, if you will. GMOs, genetically modified organisms, and primarily we're talking about two things, grains that are modified, but also now a conversation about whether or not we want to do that with livestock. And I would imagine in your life, this is a little bit different, but in your lifetime, the hogs you were working with when you were a kid are completely different than the hogs you're raising today.
We were trying to modify them, and we did. I've got pictures on my wall in my library of my father with a Grand Champion Duroc boar, and he is big and fat. And then I got a picture of me, maybe some years later, with a Grand Champion Duroc gilt. And she is not as fat, but she's still pretty fat. And then I got a picture of my son when he was in high school with a Grand Champion Poland China boar. And he is quite lean and hard as a rock. And you look at him. I mean, the change over time, and the producers, us farmers, we're just reacting to what the consumer wants. So through breeding, we have changed all of this. And GMO, genetic engineering, is going to change a lot of things too, and it helps to make production more efficiency. On grain, we couldn't produce what we produce today without genetically engineered seeds. It protects plants against pests that would, the corn borer and the rootworm. You can have a seed, a corn plant, and if it's got this trait inside the seed and inside the plant, these pests, they won't bother it, and it just flourishes. And when I was a kid, and even later on when I came back to farm, you had to put down chemicals and pesticides and fight this stuff, or else you just let the pests eat half your crop. And so we've got a lot of new technology today that helps us dramatic change.
So what do you say to those who are criticizing the use of GMOs and, it's not natural food?
Well, they got their head in the sand. It is natural. It's regular food. It's not different. You cannot take and test this animal or this corn. This corn that's genetically engineered, you cannot tell it from the corn over here that's supposedly organic. It's all the same. I'm not against the organic guy. If he wants organic, and if he wants to pay twice the price because it's much more costly to grow whatever he's growing organically, wants to pay for it, fine. But we got a lot of people that don't have a lot of money. We got poor people. They're looking for value. You've got to give them something they can afford. And that's what modern agricultural technology does. It makes it possible to give the consumer value that they would never have otherwise.
Okay. I'm afraid it's my clock now that's ticking. I'd love to be able to sit and talk to you all day about these things because I know that you've got a lot of wisdom and reflection to share with us. But we're at the point in time where we need to really wrap up, I'm afraid. So let me ask you some more general questions as you look down the road in the future and look at the past, if you will. What do you think is the most significant, transformative aspect of agriculture that's changed in your lifetime? And let me just throw out a few options, if you will. Technological change, just the genetic aspects of agriculture, the scale or the size of things, or how the products are marketed.
All of the above. I mean, you can't isolate one from the other. All of those things. I mean, we've talked about the genetics are different. We've talked about the technology. We've talked about the machinery that let you, my father, when he came back to the farm and started farming, when I was just a little kid, for a few years there, he could pick 100 bushel of corn in a day. When I ride that combine in the fall, we pick and shell 100 bushel of corn in 7 minutes. I mean, you can't hardly imagine the change we've seen. And that's where we're at today. And if you didn't have the new machinery and technology, the genetic engineering to protect the plants against weeds and pests of all kinds, you just wouldn't be able to, it wouldn't be the same agriculture that we have today. It's different.
What do you see for the future of farming in the United States? Optimistic?
It's going to continue to change. I'm very optimistic, but I would also say that you have to have enough a volume of operation to be successful and to succeed. And the reason is when you produce a lot of grain or a lot of hogs or whatever, you don't need a lot of margin from every bushel or every pig to succeed financially. You just need a little margin. But if you only have 20 pigs and a little patch of corn, can you imagine the margin you'd need to prosper or to even raise your family? That's why modern farming, commercial farming, factory farms, call them what you want, but they are providing great value to the customers and the people of the country. We raise our family on less than 10% of our income for food. 10%, less than 10% for food. The developing countries where they've got everybody scratching around and a couple chickens around, they're spending half their income on food because they're not efficient at doing anything. And you just can't avoid trying to be efficient. In the future, we will continue to look for new opportunities and options. I have no idea what they'll be because how many of us thought we'd see an agriculture today as it is if we were looking at it from 40 years ago? Mm-hmm. We wouldn't see it. How many thought we'd have the internet today and the cell phone of mine that keeps going off? How many thought we'd have all of that? Nobody.
Does your son have any children?
He has 5 kids, and I don't know if anybody will farm or not.
Well, here's my question for you, Mr. Secretary. What do you tell one of those, I assume there's a boy in that mix someplace. Mm-hmm. What do you tell that young man, or even young ladies, I don't want to be too sexist about this, who says, I think I want to stay on the farm and stay with agriculture?
Well, of course, if they want to do that, the door's open. My son would welcome them, and I would too. I mean, I would hope somebody might, but I don't know. Everybody has to make their own opinion, their own decision. My dad didn't push me into it, and I didn't push my son into it. He didn't go to an agricultural college any more than I did. He went and studied business.
What advice would you give him, though?
I think there's a good future in agriculture. That's my advice. And it's a good life. It's a good place to raise your kids. I think it's very good. I would never discourage it, but you got to let them make their own decisions.
Would you recommend they go off to college and get that agriculturally related degree?
I'd recommend they get a degree. I think they have to decide what they want. A degree in business will help them. A degree in agriculture would help them. Whatever they choose, because the reality is, if you just think about it, most people that go to college don't end up working in the field they study. I don't say ever, but the majority don't. They, I don't know, go someplace else. But it's a learning process, and it's maturity. It's a great thing, and they need to get that education.
Any final reflections as we wrap up then, Mr. Secretary?
Well, just as I said, I'm optimistic about the future. I'm very grateful. I have been blessed from day one with a wonderful family and growing up on the farm and all of the things that I have done. If I stood here and told you I planned it this way, no, I didn't. But I did take advantage of opportunities, or tried to, when they appeared. And I've just been very fortunate that a lot of opportunities have appeared, and I've been able to do my best, and grateful for that chance.
Well, you mentioned opportunity. For a long time, you and I have been looking for the opportunity to be able to sit down and have this conversation.
Yeah.
I'm thrilled that we finally were able to get it accomplished, and it's been nothing but a delight for me to listen to your reflections and stories about your career and your long career in agriculture. So thank you very much, Secretary Block.
Been a pleasure, and I compliment you on your persistence.
It paid off.
It always does.
Okay, thank you.